Anchors of War, Chapter 6, March 8th, 2904, Severus Station. Hackett looked over his old office, feeling slightly sad. It was empty now, the boxes that had held his belongings loaded aboard America. He had been at this post for the last 6 years, and now he was leaving it permanently. He would probably be back here at some point. Severus held the only major shipyards in the area, but it wouldn't be as the commander of the military forces there. He had a new post now. Hackett looked down at his new dress uniform, specifically at the rank insignia on his shoulders, which now held 4 stars instead of 3. He was being given command of 3rd Fleet, since the old admiral who previously had held that command had resigned, and Hackett was now the hero of Hannah's world. He won 1 battle. Now they were already calling him a hero. He was being given command of a fleet that was larger than his last one by an order of magnitude because he won a single battle. A very high-profile battle, and humanity's first battle against an alien enemy, but a single battle nonetheless. Hackett guessed that the president wanted to distract people from the fact that there was an almost completely unknown enemy out there somewhere who may or may not have the resources to crush the Confederation in an instant. So he was being paraded in front of the people as a hero to show that they could be beaten. He left his office, shaking his head slightly as he did so. Not that he wasn't happy he had been given a fleet with several Titans after his last command had had only half a dozen super dreadnoughts. He was just a little annoyed by it all. On top of that, the only orders he had been given were to attack the most important Dissecry system he could find. He was used to operating under fairly strict orders in peacetime. Defend this region, do not leave it under any circumstances, and was still reeling from his new freedom. He had Titans. Year 509,684, Month 6, Day 15 Galactic Standard Time, aboard Dissecry Dominion Super Dreadnought, Everlasting Bloodlust, Helgat. Quickery knew his fleet had probably shocked no small number of people in the Helgat system with its appearance. It was torn apart, 10 heavy capital ships remaining, all with some damage, and only 26 small screening ships left. Quickery also knew he was screwed. He was on his way to meet the leader of the sector's defenses on Helgat Station, Sekfen. Yet another relative of Sekfri's to be angry at him for allowing his kin to die in battle. And Sekfen had the added bonus of being able to execute Quickery for allowing his fleet to get so shredded. He watched the display in front of him. His fleet had already met and then passed the Helgat fleet and its menacing Titans. The Helgat fleet had now interposed itself between the Gravlane Quickery's fleet had come from and the inhabited planet. The now pitiful 4th expansion fleet was at the huge shipyards above Helgat and was undergoing the repairs its ships desperately needed. Quickery felt the light shudder that meant the shuttle had landed in the station's hangar bay. Filled with trepidation, he tentatively stepped into the bay. He was greeted by 20 armored Marines carrying particle beams with Sekfen standing right in the middle of them. Gulping, Quickery walked towards Sekfen, trying to appear nonchalant. He doubted that he fooled anyone. "Fleet Leader Quickery de Senque reporting for debriefing, Fleet Leader Prime," said Quickery, saluting the man by raising his left hand, palm facing himself, the back of his hand facing Sekfen, and his elbow at 90 degrees. Sekfen did not return the salute. He merely looked at Quickery, a look of intense disgust on his face. "Quickery Quay," Sekfen began, his tone angry. Quickery winced internally. His honor name had already been stripped from him. There was only one thing that would follow. "You have been stripped of your honor name, your rank as fleet leader, and you have been accused of cowardice before the enemy, extreme incompetence, and colluding with enemies of the Dominion to commit violent acts of terror," finished Sekfen, his eyes blazing. Quickery was stunned. He had known they would charge him with something, but this? The first 2 charges he had expected. The last, however, that was a surprise. Maybe Sekfri had already communicated their plans for the human, and Sekfen decided he liked the sound of calling people terrorists. "As punishment for your crimes, you have been sentenced to an execution by firing squad, to be carried out immediately," said Sekfen, sneering now. The moment Sekfen had finished the sentence, the Marines had picked Quickery up. and started carrying him towards the nearest wall of the hangar bay. Finding his voice, Quikree began yelling and trying to pull himself free from his captors. You can't do this! I can appeal! By law, I can appeal!" shouted Quikree, desperate. He knew that nothing would save him now, but he had to try. "Ah, I forgot. Immediate execution. No possible attempt at appeal. Goodbye, Quikree," said Sekfen, turning to leave. The Marines pushed Quikree to the wall and fastened him to it with adhesive manacles. They then lined up in a semicircle around him. Then, their particle beams turned to a setting low enough that he would have a very slow death, and the hangar bay wouldn't be breached. They began to fire. March 8, 2904, unidentified Disecri Dominion warship, unknown system. Matthew awoke to a sound he knew all too well, the hum-hiss of particle beams. He stood up quickly. There was nowhere to hide in the cell. If anyone came to kill him, he would have to surprise them as they came in. Unfortunately, there was nothing in the cell that could be used as a weapon, which could be an issue. He watched as his guards ran off to deal with whatever had happened. Raising his fists, he waited. After a few muted shouts and several more particle beam shots, a man that had obviously been hit several times with particle beam fire walked up to the door. The alien man pressed a few buttons, and the shield dropped. Matthew moved forwards cautiously, making sure there was nobody around the corner of his cell. There wasn't. "Who are you?" said Matthew, looking at the Disec. There was also the unspoken question of why, but that might have taken a while more to answer. Friend. I cannot explain further. Take this," the alien said through clenched teeth, obviously in severe pain. The man tossed a small backpack at Matthew. Then the man collapsed, presumably dead. Matthew, shaken, looked inside it. There was a small cube there with some writing printed on the side, a thin sheet of plastic, a map, and something that looked like a datastic. He picked up the cube, aware that he had very little time to examine it. It had a small button on one face. He pressed it, and suddenly the small box dissolved into silvery strands, which then attached to his arm and crawled across his body, forming into some kind of Disecri military uniform as it went, complete with gloves, a hood, and a mask. He thought he knew what the cube had been: instant clothes, a plaything of the rich in human space. He had no idea if it was more or less expensive for the Disecri and anyone else out there. Matthew put on the small backpack and picked up the particle beam. It felt light, much lighter than any weapon should be. He slung it over his shoulder. Then he studied the map. It was printed on a thin sheet of plastic, much like the message he had received days earlier. It highlighted a route from the cells to the ship's airlock that was docked with the station, with helpfully printed instructions in English. He put the map back in the backpack and began making his way to the airlock, trying to seem like he belonged, making sure to keep his gloved hands in his pockets. The airlock was far from the cells, and he passed several crewmen as they moved around on the ship. He got a few glances and caused a few people's conversations to quiet or stop entirely, but nobody stopped and questioned him. He wondered what kind of uniform he was wearing. Maybe it was police or special forces or something. As he neared the airlock, the number of crewmen around dropped. He only encountered one other man, and he was obviously also going to the station, and the man didn't seem to want to talk. They walked side by side for a while, not looking at each other. Matthew took one hand out of his pocket to scratch his nose, only realizing his mistake a moment later when the man looked at him, startled. The alien started to reach for what was probably his comms unit. In a flash, Matthew unslung his particle beam, aimed it, and fired at the alien's head. The man fell, shuddering slightly. Half of his face burned away and his brain cooked. Matthew picked up the pace slightly, barely restraining the overpowering urge to sprint the rest of the distance to the airlock. As he neared it, he tensed, waiting to be ambushed by soldiers in waiting. Nothing happened. Slightly relieved, Matthew simply strolled up to the airlock and tapped the button to open it, making sure nobody was around to see his hand. Then he strolled onto the station, watching for pursuit. Year 509,684, Month 6, Day 15 Galactic Standard Time, aboard Janzek Station. Illyri border with Desikri Dominion. "You'll never take me, Ali." Those were the last words of a murderer. Not the most inspired of last words, but last words all the same. The area man fell, a particle beam having gone through his mouth as he spoke, coming out of the back of his head. Hanala rose from her crouch behind the portable shielding unit she had thrown down moments before, turning it off with a command to her HUD. She was careful not to touch the device itself. It would have been hot enough to burn her unprotected hands. She glanced at her surroundings, frowning for a moment. She was in the slums of the huge station. The room, which had once been a cargo bag, now had dozens of small sheet plastic shacks. The denizens of this area knew to stay hidden after hearing particle weapons, but you never knew. She walked over to the area she had killed, a satisfied expression on her face. He had killed 2 people for no other reason than that they had mildly irritated him. His green skin was dirty and unwashed, and one of his pointed ears had been removed in some long-ago fight. His compact particle beam was lying on the floor beside him, the emitter smoking slightly from overheating. She supposed she shouldn't have been so satisfied that a man had died, but he was a murderer, the scum of the universe, the lowest of the low. Hanala took out her personal comms unit, calling the station's regular police to her location and notifying them of the situation. They arrived quickly, hoping to be able to clean up the mess before too many people saw it. "Another one, Detective? You're doing well this month," said one of the policemen, his expression neutral as he tapped his report into a datapad. She nodded. She had captured 4 murderers in the past month and killed 2, including the area man. Only one had done the deed on the station, though. Most of her arrests were done from alerts put out by Janzek, the planet, and other nearby stations. "Somebody's got to get work done around here," she said, smiling. True, said the policeman, nodding. He was slightly unnerved by the woman, who smiled after killing a man. Still, she got results, and he wasn't ranked high enough to kick her off of the station. Satisfied now that her part was done, Hanala took a quick travel platform out to one of the station's long-term docks and walked the remaining distance to her ship, the Illyri Detective Agency ship Just Verdict. It was basically a small, lightly armed passenger ship with a brig. The ship was designed for a small crew, or even only one, like in Hanala's case. It was her home, squad car, and transportation all rolled into one. Another day over, another case solved.